We really have four main clients. The first being, and the most widespread being, victims of violence, so domestic violence victims. And of course, remembering that domestic violence can be physical, it can be psychological, it can be emotional, it can be verbal, it can be sexual. Sometimes you'll get an elder that is a victim of domestic violence. A lot of my elder abuse cases right now are the abuse, mainly verbal, some like threatening behaviors. You think about an elders over the age of 60, 65. So their kids are grown. We're talking about 40-year-olds, but if they're not working, and we're talking a pandemic and like finding jobs, so where do they go? Do they go on the street? And so parents, despite the abuse, they're like still worried about their child. And then we also have sex abuse victims and child abuse victims. A mother coming in with her child or children, those children have witnessed domestic violence. And so directly they're impacted, and that's abuse, even though it's not child physical abuse, but it is that psychological abuse that the kids are having to witness this domestic violence, whether it's verbal abuse to mom or if it's physical abuse to dad or whatever the case is. These children are witnessing it, so it impacts the family dynamics all the way around.
Viví 31 años con él, toda una vida, tuve 3 hijos con él. Desde un principio yo fui maltratada físicamente, verbalmente, fui humillada, fui golpeada. Mi vida al lado de él fue un infierno. Y nunca se me va a olvidar, yo tenía 5 de 6 días con él cuando me dio mi primera cachetada. Y la vida siguió y nunca cambió. Él decía que iba a cambiar, nunca cambió. Yo no lo dejaba por miedo, que a mí se me hacía difícil la vida, salir adelante sola con mis hijos, porque yo estaba acostumbrada a no trabajar.
I've suffered from narcissistic abuse and emotional abuse. My first abusive relationship occurred in my senior year of high school. He would yell at me and threaten to kill me over small things. There was one time we were driving around and he threatened to crash the car with me in it, and he kept swerving lanes purposefully while speeding. He would also try and force me to do sexual acts on him, no matter how many times I said no. My parents did not know of this relationship. I knew if I stayed, it would only get worse. My next relationship, I suffered from narcissistic abuse, and I didn't realize it until I got help. He was manipulative, would gaslight me, lie, punch items that were around me as if he wished he were punching me instead, alienate me from friends and social events, and would involve others to belittle me, including his friends and family. Everything was my fault, and I was the reason why he was so unhappy. Nothing I did was ever good enough. In response to the trauma, my body began to disassociate and began repressing memories, so I can't remember some events, nor do I remember the full extent of the abuse.
When I first entered a relationship, everything was going very well, but soon he began constantly putting me down, calling me names every time I tried to express any emotion. Not only did it affect me, but also the way I interacted and viewed others. I became a lot more paranoid and anxious that the same situation would happen again.
A huge misconception of domestic violence is that women are only the victims. I also believe that domestic violence towards men is also underreported, because if you have to think about how does that demasculize a male to have to come forward and admit that they're being abused by a woman, but then you think about the system in place, right? The police are kind of like, what do you want us to do? What do you mean? The same thing you would do if it was on the other, the shoe on the other foot. I have a male client who has been a victim, and he's come into the Justice Center 3 times. And this last time he was so shut down with me. And I'm like, what's happening? And it's for him, it's just like, I have to report because child welfare is involved. And so I have to get this restraining order. But for him, he's like, to go in front of a judge and say that I'm a victim of violence and that this little woman, he's like, I'm not going to hit her. And he's like, so she continues to hit me. And he's like, I know that she's not going to do harm, but your kids are seeing like all this abuse and what's happening. And yes, I appreciate that you don't put your hands on you and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, but it shouldn't take away from the realization that men get abused as well. And so I think really providing resources for men, and at least, I don't want to say normalizing it because violence shouldn't be normalized, but we need to at least allow men to feel comfortable coming forward with being victims of domestic violence. Intervention, education, and collaboration are really our three pillars. Because I get that I'm going to get a client who's going to come in and then they're going to disappear and ghost me. But I know it's only a matter of time before they come back in again. And sometimes people feel that guilt, like, hey, Kelly, I don't know if you can still help me. I can always help you. You can call, text. I have a client who we've been working probably for a year, and she goes back, and and I don't fault clients. It's not like I can't help you. You went back. Having to be a good advocate is recognizing that there's a cycle of violence. It's the same with alcohol and drug dependency, right? You understand that relapse is a part of recovery. And so you don't say, okay, you relapse, you're done. It's how do we prevent this from happening again? And so it's that intervention. What interventions can we put in place for victims that are either at risk for domestic violence or have experienced domestic violence? And it's education, right? Like, how do we educate people on domestic violence education? Looking out for red flags, recognizing, hey, I know when my partner drinks, they escalate. So if I see that they had a long day and they've been drinking, I'm going to my mom's house. I'll come back in the morning just to avoid that stuff. So intervention, education, and collaboration.
So what I did to move past it was by taking time to myself and only focusing bettering myself. So I spent a lot of time in my room reflecting. I would also read affirmations and write in my journal as a form of expression. I would also go on walks with my dog to clear my mind. I would paint and tend to my plants since it made me feel productive and felt like I accomplished something. All of this really helped me get through this rough patch.
From a young age, girls are taught that if a boy is mean to us, they like us. That's why this cycle starts and continues. We're never taught how to stop it or leave. Later on in life, we're taught that if we get cheated on or if a man leaves us, we were lacking in some department. If we get hit or mistreated, it was our fault because we must have done something to make them angry. This vicious cycle will continue because of sayings such as, boys will be boys. That's just another way for them to not take accountability for their actions.
Yo les aconsejo a las mujeres que se alejen de él lo más pronto que pueda antes de que sea demasiado tarde.